and welcome to the International Center Goa. I'm Pushkar, Director of the Center, and I'm delighted to welcome Shakti Sinha ji today to ICG. This is our first physical program in about since February actually. So when we talked on the phone about 10 days ago, I wasn't sure whether we should do this program, and then I thought we can do it in the open. Except that because of all the rain that we had in the last couple of days, and especially yesterday, it was always a risk to do it outside, although I think outside would have been nice, but it's also extremely humid today. So today morning we had to make a quick call on this, and we decided to move here, and I'm really thankful, and I think everyone here is appreciative of the fact that you have all turned up to come under these difficult conditions. So Shakti Sinha ji especially for flying down from Delhi, and then Dr. Himanshu Roy, who is on my left, who is the Atal Bihari Vajpayee Fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, NMML, of which Shakti ji was earlier the director. And we are also lucky that Dr. Constantino Xavier happened to be in Goa at that time. And when I came across the book, I thought, okay, there are really two parts to this. One would be domestic politics, and the other would be foreign policy. The Vajpayee period is remembered internationally for the Pokhran II tests, of course. But it is also remembered for a full term by the BJP in power. So both are extremely important. They are in the words of Shakti Sinha ji, they are turning points. And so when I found that Constantino was in Goa, I said, well, are you here on the 8th? Because that's the date we're looking at. We're looking at 8th and the 9th. And he said, yes. So that's how we have this panel here. And it saves me the trouble of either, scratching my head to look for the right questions to ask from this book, which I will. And there'll be difficult questions, Shakti ji. But before that, we'll focus more on the two discussants we have here. Just a little bit about what we have been able or not able to do in these past months. We had to actually cancel 3 very, very good programs in March, which was one discussion of Dr. Peter D'Souza's book with Gopal Guru coming down from Bombay, the editor of Economic and Political Weekly. So that had to be cancelled. Then we had Thomas Abraham, the author of 2 fantastic books, one on SARS, one on polio, if I remember correctly. Both really award-winning books, and he's a journalist come academic, and he has written on pandemics in the past. So that would have been very, very interesting. Unfortunately, got cancelled. And the third program we had to cancel was the second ICG annual lectures by Christine Fair of Georgetown University. And that I thought was risky, but it also could have been a lot of fun having her here, but unfortunately all that got cancelled. We have recently, however, started with webinars, as has been a trend, a little slow to start with because ICG was home to doctors and health workers in the front line of fighting COVID-19 for several months. But we started with our first webinar on the 16th of December with Dr. R.A. Mashelkar and Dr. Anil Kakotkar. I think a couple of you told me that they watched it all through and through it, all of 90 minutes. And I thought that was very well done, not just because you had very well-known speakers and discussants, but also because there were no technical glitches. Because in something like this, what makes you really anxious is not the speakers or whether the planes are going to arrive on time, but whether if there's a 2-minute interruption, then the audience will simply leave. We also have the next in the series, ICG 2020's Development Dialogue on the 20th. This is an early announcement. Mr. Suresh Prabhu will be giving a talk and answering questions on 20th of January. But also next week, next Friday, and I wanted that to be initially a webinar, except that the person whom I invited said that, no, I'm coming to Goa. So I didn't have a choice. On the 15th, we'll have Dr. Amar Patnaik, who's a Rajya Sabha MP from Odisha, and he's the author of a fantastic book, an academic book published by Palgrave in 2018 on how institutions matter and their relevance, especially in the rural context. It's based on his PhD, and Dr. Patnaik is an extremely accomplished, I wouldn't say an academic, but a practitioner. And we are lucky that we are going to be able to have him, except that, again, it will be in similar conditions, or if we can do it outside. If it's not uncomfortable outside, we'll do it outside. That's about it. And Shaktijit, first of all, thank you officially on behalf of the International Center for coming, and Dr. Himanshu, and Dr. Constantino Xavier, who happened to be here. I'll repeat that. Lucky for all of us.
You're very lucky. He's going to Delhi tomorrow.
And, the book can be read in many different ways. One part of the book is for the lay reader, a generalist, somebody who likes to read books on a variety of subjects. So it's a current affairs book, and there are fantastic stories from a man who's been there, who was right inside the Prime Minister's office. So the stories that are told, they're fascinating by themselves. But for a social scientist, the book makes for a slightly different read. Because when you're reading these stories, you're thinking of, the first thing I was thinking of is you have these individuals. You have the Prime Minister, you have his ministers, you have opposition leaders, and you have these Prime Ministers and presidents from elsewhere in the world who are part of the power play, that is foreign policy. And they are interacting in the context of specific institutions, domestically and internationally. So when you look at Pokhran tests, Pokhran 2 tests, for example, that happened in a particular context. But other than that context, it happens in the context of certain existing institutions. So the way I would read it, or any social scientist would read it, is individuals interacting in the context of given institutions. On the one hand, you have these individuals who are restrained by these institutions. They function within that within the parameters set by those institutions, those rules and those norms that are in place. And in some cases, you see these individuals trying to reshape these institutions. And the institutions pushing back and sometimes giving way to these changes. And Pokhran 2 certainly has to be seen in that context. But domestically too, when you read through the chapters, what was constantly going through my mind is that you have a BJP government in power for the first time, in a meaningful sense, and they are forced to recognize the limitations of their power, that's one, not just in terms of number of seats in the parliament, but also in the context of the institutions within which they have to function. Now, when institutions fall apart, or when the capacity of the state to maintain, hold up those institutions fails, then you have the kind of scenes that you had from Washington, D.C., right? So the point being that a reading of the book, for most of us, it's a fantastic read. It flows. The first thing I did was complimented him for his writing. I said, did you have to do much editing? He said, no, it was written like that. The editor made some changes. So I said, but it's a story. There are lots of stories well told. And of course, there are lots of go-ons who figure in it. So I won't let everybody on to who figures in these stories and who does not. But there are lots of stories about individuals from Goa. With this, I think I'll pass on the mic. We are actually not going to pass on mic. We all have individual mics because we are just taking all precautions necessary. We begin with Dr. Himanshu Roy. And then as things progress, we'll have Dr. Constantino Xavier chipping in. Okay.
Thank you. For the past 4 or 5 years, indirectly I have been reading, apart from this book that I went through a couple of times while I was preparing, and then I was working when the book came from 18th of December, so till this time, when the book launch, etc. was going on. So while coming from my residence to office every day in the morning, I passed through the Prime Minister residence. 7 Racecourse Road, old name, now Jan Kalyan Marg, the new name. And then I remember him that this used to be once upon a time his office. And then listening about Prime Minister Vajpayee for the past 4 years or 5 years, indirectly from him, the impact of Vajpayee on him, that one can feel the way certain things he learns and then brings it into his everyday routine life. So the first question that I would like to know from him, that how do you look at the man, Vajpayee? Let me begin with this as a student of social science, because he is using the word couple of times, and I'm reading it from page 335. Vajpayee was a liberal in the classical 19th century sense. This is the word he is using. We have been familiar when BJP comes to power that we are nationalists, vis-a-vis liberal, left liberal combined, etc. So he is using the word Vajpayee was liberal in the classical 19th century sense. How do you look at Vajpayee, the man, his ideas? Was he enigmatic, at least to outsiders? क्या पहेली थे हमारे लिए, हम लोगों के लिए? He used to know him very closely, intimately, his family, his entire, at least for the last 80 onwards, he has been knowing him. So how do you look at the man and his ideas?
Thank you. Thank you, Pushkar, for the invitation to be here. This obviously is the first live event I'm doing for the book. We never launched the book through any event or a VIP or anything. It just went into the bookshops on 18th, as you mentioned. Before I answer your question, Dr. Manshuroy, and before Tino grills me, this is not what's the English word, hagiography? It's an account which does not treat Vajpayee as anything more than a human being. A person with faults, a person with limitations. So at no stage is it a fan book, you know. It's an account of somebody like a fly, who's like a fly on the wall, observing and being there, sometimes actively, sometimes not so actively. And that's what I hope I brought it across, you know. Now, to describe Vajpayee, the question you asked me will take me a book. Enigmatic, absolutely enigmatic. I mean, when your party is small, and when your point of view is not very well accepted, you have to make, all leaders do, who are successful, ambiguous statements at times. Not every time. Sometimes you have to be very specific. Sometimes you have to be ambiguous what you say, so that different people read you differently. To me, that's a sign of a politician, and politician is not bad. Most of us think politics is bad. No. Politics is the art of the possible, with the intention to change the discourse, the narrative, and the circumstances within that. Why do I call him 19th century liberal? Is in the sense that the word liberal today, to me, is complete. I mean, the 19th century people, the Burkes and the Ricardos, would not recognize the liberal of today as liberal, you know? In terms of attitude towards trade, towards the polity, towards the rule of law, all those things, in that sense, you know, that you function within a coherent constitutional structure, but a structure which is undergoing. Please remember England of the 17th and the 18th century. Massive churn. The collapse of feudalism. The re-emergence of feudalism through the parliament, but by co-opting the industrial classes. It was, so what we say about politicians today, how dirty, how corrupt, every one of them applies to England of the 18th century. And yet in that, to see a broad constitutional framework emerging, which works, which follows the rule of law, that is what I meant by liberal. Also, and this is something which people find it controversial, they will not like, many of them don't like what I said, keep religion out of politics. You'll find it surprising, but keep religion. People have to understand Hindutva as a political phenomena, not in the terms of, and not in the sense of worship. The word the BJP and the RSS uses is not religion, because no Indian language captures the word religion. Religion is an Abrahamic term with certain connotations. We have philosophies. Dharma is not religion. We have philosophies, we have methods of worship, upasana paddhati as we call it, right? So that is why rally around India, Mother India, fine. That's number one priority, Mother India. So it's a liberal, but in the context of India, where secularism does not mean anti-religion, to use the word religion in the Western sense, but learns to live with people's beliefs. So that is what I meant, but as I said, I don't think so at any stage Mr. Vajpayee has articulated his philosophy. I've gleaned it from his speeches, from his interactions, from his behavior, from his actions. So that is what I've tried to capture it in the last chapter, which is what you're quoting from.
I slightly find I'm puzzled here because on page 328, you are again using, and I am reading it out within quotes, there was both happiness. He's writing about, for Vajpayee, I'm putting him, Independence Day on 15th August 1947 came drenched in blood. Fine. There was both happiness and depression. Happiness at the end of 1,000 years of dependence.
That's what I'm quoting him. I'm not putting my words. These are his words. Basically, Mr. Vajpayee's poem is there of 47, where he describes it, Hazar Saal Baad, you know. So I'm quoting him. I'm not saying, I'm not putting words into anybody's mouth. I'm just quoting from him.
So that's a good, thanks, clarification. Let me proceed ahead. And because this is contemporary political history, and while reading through it, I find a constant tension, a sort of instability in the government every day, lurking from one event sort of to another like this, the impression that I get. We know Vajpayee for 3-4 things. For example, highway, the Golden Quadrilateral, then Pokhran, of course, then Kargil, and parliament attack. If I remember correctly, I don't find this parliament attack.
Because that happened after my book ends. My book ends at Kargil War. Parliament attack is 2000. December 2001.
Therefore, you left it. There is a continuity between, I feel, and it comes out from your book, deductive logic, if I apply, similarity in the continuation of policy between Vajpayee government and contemporary Modi government. I would like to know from you. For example, when Vajpayee was there as the Prime Minister, Hasina was there as the Bangladesh Prime Minister. Good relationship, good rapport between the two countries and the two Prime Ministers. We find the similar kind of rapport between the contemporary Prime Minister and the contemporary Bangladesh. Then in many of the economic policies that Vajpayee as a liberal in the sense of the 19th century that you are saying about, is again we find in terms of economic policy being applied. Am I right?
One, I would not stress the point too much because, you know, as a social scientist, political scientist, contemporary history, context is very important, circumstances are very, very important. Well, there were more common things. When the two Indian Prime Minister meets the Israeli Prime Minister for the first time, this is New York, September 1998, who was the Israeli Prime Minister? Benjamin Netanyahu. Who's the Prime Minister Mr. Modi meets with? Benjamin Netanyahu, you know. So there are lots of other similarities, but no, the context was different. But yes, they came from the same political family. They had different experiences. They were two very different individuals. So there would be continuity in lots of sense, in the worldview sense. But there would also be differences because the two actually represented two different periods of time. One, BJP had 180 MPs at most. The other starts by building it, 282 and now 300 plus, right? It makes a lot of difference. It makes a lot of difference. You know, so being a student of history, counterfactual to me has certain limitations, you know. Economists are better, come work after the counterfactuals. I am not better with counterfactuals. So I will not stress too much of the point of the difference and the similarity, precisely because they face two very different circumstances. But yes, they come from the same family. Let's not forget that. The Sangh Parivar is very much...
The political position is different now. Let me take the discussion further. Do you think that Vajpayee, as we felt, was soft on Pakistan in context of Kargil?
No, not at all. I thought Tino would ask that question, but I'd answer you. Not at all soft on Pakistan. There's no question. In fact, can I, Pushkar, with your permission, take 4 minutes just to tell what the book is about? So that, I think, would help the context setting a little better with the questions. Because people haven't read the book, so it's unfair. I call this book The Years That Changed India. Why do I say the year that... Of course, India changes every time. Nothing is stable. We change all the time. 5 specific developments. 1, this was the first genuine non-Congress government in Indian history. Morarji Desai's government was Morarji himself was a congressman all his life. V.P. Singh was a congressman. Chandrasekhar had been a congressman. Vajpayee was the first Indian Prime Minister never to have been a member of the Congress Party. So and his government also, other than a few people from Congress like Vajpayee, Ramamurthy, etc., was absolutely non-Congress. Unstable government, lack of cohesion, bickering on day 1, bad press throughout. Today, all the people write of the glory days. If you read the papers of those days, completely different version you will get. And to carry along ultimately 20 parties, you have to make compromises. Some look unseeming, some get along. But ultimately, the government fell because on certain points they said, we will not compromise anymore, let the government fall. So to accept the fact that compromises are required, even when he was under attack from the allies, he said, no, we should understand that they represent regional aspirations. We must be more sensitive to their needs. But then also there are certain limitations where the government fell. 1. Second, India crossed the nuclear threshold. For 30 years, we said we have a nuclear option. We did a test in 74, but called it peaceful nuclear explosion. An oxymoron, if you take my word for it. The window for testing was finishing. CTBT, Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, was there. World would not allow you to test. And if you did not test, the adverse security atmosphere, the China-Pakistan nuclear and missile cooperation, which is so well documented those days by Jane's Weekly and later by Andrew Small's book, was closing. You had to do it. Narasimha understood it, tried to do it, could not do it. Vajpayee went and did it. Third, reached out to Pakistan to demonstrate to the world India is a responsible nuclear weapons power. Subpoint, Pakistan is not my rival. We are not in the same league. So I will reach out to Pakistan. Next point, the reach out to America. At a time when America was sanctioning India, abusing India. See the languages being used by Madeleine Albright and Bill Clinton against the Vajpayee government. Awful. The Australian Labour spokesperson used the word, this is an act of nuclear bastardy. I used it. I've explained it in the book. So, at that stage, to reach out to America through the Jaswant Singh Stope Talbot talks and to speak at Asia Society on 25th September or whatever, it's 98, to call US and India natural allies. The word ally is not used by any Indian leader before or since. That was an act of, again. And then the Lahore bus trip of Pakistan outrage, and then, of course, Kargil. And this is where I'll answer your question. Pakistan occupied brilliantly, tactically brilliantly, the heights of Kargil. Actually, it's much more than Kargil, but let's leave it at Kargil. We were late in it. We reacted late, but then we reacted very robustly. The world panicked. 2 nuclear weapons power at war. We said, fine, we will not extend the war zone beyond where it is. We will not cross the line of control to demonstrate to the world India is a responsible nuclear power. The world said ceasefire. We said no. Ceasefire only when the Pakistanis withdraw from all the territories they have occupied. They denied it, the world put pressure, we stood firm on it, and then we had the Blair House Agreement of July 4th, 1999. So we were not soft on Pakistan at all, but Pakistan is not in your league. That also you have to tell the world. So these are the 5 basic things that my book covers. So no, he was not soft on Pakistan at all, but as he said many times, you can change your friends but not your neighbors. Can India be seen as a major player in the world if it is mired and bogged down in South Asia? The answer is no. So therefore, the attitude to Pakistan, his thinking, people said it was a failure. Vinay Sarpati says Vajpayee spent 5 years of his prime ministership uselessly pursuing friendship with Pakistan. Wrong statement, but that's the kind of position he had to frame.
Because the related question that I have, and the curiosity to know as well, was that intelligence failure in case of Kargil?
Absolutely. One word, yes.
And it was a systemic failure?
Yes. One analysis. That's enough. That's it.
Then
Security is the छोड़
हाँ वो छोड़ देंगे मतलब एक मुझे जो इसमें क्वेश्चंस दिख रहा है that is a learning from all of us in social sciences we read that in liberal democracy we co-opt the opposition and here we find in Vajpayee as a leader of opposition that he has written in a paragraph on page 58 and I am citing it. The first was that the lesson that we are learning. The first was that the opposition in politics is not necessarily an antagonist. The way the political opposition for the sake of opposition has been doing against any government in India. In case of Vajpayee, we don't find this kind of just for the sake of opposition. Because even as the leader of opposition, he cooperated with the government at many fronts. Can you cite any example apart from the United Nations where the leader of opposition was sent?
That, of course, is the most important. The 1994 UN Human Rights Commission thing in Geneva. And he led the delegation, and the Minister of State, Salman, was the deputy leader, and etc. Ghulam Nabi Azad was there. Otherwise, also, whenever foreign dignitaries came to India, he met the leader of opposition, always meets them. And he always took a detailed briefing from MEA, Minister of External Affairs. And in every meeting, he said, we fight the government, but on foreign policy, we stand with the government. One, he also told every foreign dignitary that how does Indian parliamentary democracy work? He says the opposition must have its say. But then he added, but I understand ultimately parliament has to function and therefore the government must have its way. He says, I will oppose the government, but I will not oppose it to the point that things stall. I understand, I'll raise my point, and then numbers are important, government will have its way. And the then Congress General Secretary who had come to India was a Nigerian gentleman. He's saying, no, this is the difference. He says, that's the word he used. He's saying, in my country, we don't have a word for opposition, so the word we use is enemy. Pratipaksh is not Dushman. So for us, it's different, so that's what. So he was, in that sense, yes, he went with the government, but he opposed the government, as he should. Otherwise, he might as well be co-opted by the government,